Welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So this is the panel on the Graduate School of Geography's leadership in the fields of urban and economic and human environment geography. I'm James McCarthy, currently director of the GSG. And I will say before we get started, it's been a lot of work and an interesting exercise organizing this event and the panels. And one of the things that's difficult is when you're trying to think about both 100 years of history and the future ahead of us, there's a tremendous amount of material to cover and many, many, many different ways that it could be arranged. We could have clearly an entire panel on just particular approaches at Clark Geography within any single one of those fields. So I thank our panelists for taking on the very ambitious task of trying to cover them all in the space of an hour and a bit more. So one quick announcement before we get started. I am sorry to say that one of our panelists, Lisa Stoddard, had to drop out at the last minute because of a family issue. She's really sorry that she wasn't able to join us, but it means that we at least have a little bit more time for the people who are here. So I'm not going to say much. I will say simply that it's clear, it's empirically evident that Clark Geography has played a tremendous and important and central leadership role in the fields of economic, urban, and human environment geography over the past 100 years. That's manifest in myriad ways. And I'm going to leave it to the panelists to talk about some of those ways, and we should have some time for question and answers and discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists all at once now and ask them to present in the order that they're seated. So we will start on the left with Yuko Aoyama, who is Associate Provost and Dean of Research and Graduate Studies and a professor in the Graduate School of Geography. Yuko is an economic geographer with interests in globalization, technological innovation, and industrial organization, and a former editor of Economic Geography. John Lauermann is an urban geographer and associate professor in the School of Information at Pratt Institute and faculty director of the Spatial Analysis and Visualization Initiative, which supports geospatial research and education and provides mapping services for community partners in New York. He received his Ph.D. from the GSG in 2014. Dylan Harris is an assistant professor of geography at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. He is a Nature Society geographer with interests in climate justice and politics, storytelling, experimental political ecology, and a great deal more. He received his PhD from the GSG in 2020 and just picked up his hood this morning. Kevin St. Martin is professor and chair of the geography department at Rutgers University. He is an economic geographer and political ecologist with particular interests in fisheries, marine science and policy, community and diverse economies, and critical GIS. He received his PhD from the GSG in 1999. And finally, Dianne Rocheleau is Professor Emerita in the Graduate School of Geography. She is a feminist political ecologist with interests in environment and development, political ecology, forestry, and agriculture and landscape change. As a faculty member, advisor, and mentor in the GSG for decades, she played a central role in creating and shaping the GSG's reputation for feminist political ecology and engaged scholarship. So, thank you all.
Really close. Okay. Is this working? Yes, it is working. All right. Good afternoon. Okay, so I didn't go back to 100 years of history. I figured that my 23 years at Clark University is enough. So I'm going to talk about my 23 years, and I'll let perhaps Dianne Rocheleau here, who has a longer tenure at Clark Geography, to talk more about the in-depth history. Of course, everybody knows economics geography engages in a variety of important and pressing issues that revolve around regions and industries in transition. So an example, there was in the news this week that Taiwan is running out of water. And this impacts semiconductor manufacturing, for which the world relies on. Another example, how is the, quote, new Cold War, the tensions between China and the United States, shaping the global supply chain? Or how does the reshoring or friendshoring or nearshoring change the fate of industries or regions like Worcester County? How is technology changing our economic landscapes? Wind energy development in China or autonomous vehicle development in the United States? So these are some of the themes that economic geographers engage in, but it's a very broad field, and this is kind of my take on what economic geography is. So, what is the place that Clark holds in the discipline of economic geography? Well, from here, it becomes a personal history, and it becomes a people-centered history. I figured within 5 to 8 minute conversation, we can't really engage in an in-depth theoretical debates. So I decided to focus on people, because people is what makes community and what makes Clark unique. So the reason, well, one of the two reasons I came to Clark is the opportunity to serve as an editor-in-chief of the Clark-owned journal, Economic Geography, for which I had the privilege to serve for nearly a decade. Through this work of the journal, Clark faculty sets the agenda, the direction of economic geography, supports notable scholarship, and Clark enjoys considerable visibility through the plenary speaker series we host, or workshops and other activities associated with the journal. The journal is also one of the few remaining university-owned journal that is also top-ranked. And we have the centennial celebration for the journal coming up in 2025. So I was hired as a scholar who engages with globalization, but from a non-Anglo-American perspective, which aligned with the ongoing work at Clark at the time when I joined in 2000, in January 2000. Clark had, thanks to former President David Angel here, Clark had a funding from Lear Foundation, and David Angel organized 2 conferences, one in 1999 and another in 2001 on the geography of global economic change. Aside from the journal, the second reason I came to Clark and stay at Clark is an extremely talented set of doctoral students we attract at Clark, with whom I had the privilege to co-author various works over the years. Some of them are here. In my first decade at Clark, my research was at the intersection of technology, globalization, and culture, and I focused on what was considered, called at the time, e-commerce, e-tailing, e-logistics, foreign direct investment and entrepreneurship culture, cultural complexes, and so on. And these works are selected as those that are collaborated with faculty and doctoral students over the years at Clark. The key concept in economic geography was a collaboration with Susan Hansen and Jim Murphy, for which we held a writing workshop in Susan's house in Vermont, and this book was translated into Japanese and Korean. And I also wanted to acknowledge these people who are really what gives GSG pride and joy, really talented former doctoral students who now hold various faculty positions around the world, and unfortunately they couldn't be here today because they're too far away. They're in the UK, China, South Korea, and so on. But I wanted to acknowledge their work, the important work that they do for Clark University. And I continue to collaborate with them on research projects. But of course, we have phenomenally talented undergraduate students as well who came through Clark over the years. Shayna and Monica are particularly close to my heart as they were the students at my very first year intensive class I offered in 2002. And I found advising 17-year-olds quite daunting at the time. But I recall David Angel actually telling me that it is the best thing and I would enjoy it because, he said, I would find meeting people there particularly rewarding. And I was like, meeting 17-year-olds? How interesting would it be? Well, he was right. I was absolutely wrong. I still keep in touch with Shayna and Monica. Shayna has gotten the master's subsequently and became a transportation planner. And Monica teaches geography. She got a Ph.D. from University of Arizona subsequently. So these people are my pride and joy. Also, I want to acknowledge mentoring international students, because I was one coming to the US for the first time at age 18, and experiencing college life here in the US as an international student has been something of a feat. These students are honors students who wrote thesis with me and are active as professionals in various parts of the world. There's tremendous joy in serving as a role model for female students coming from various parts of Asia. And this is the role that I plan to continue into the future. Okay, last but not least, we have been selected as the host of the 7th Global Conference in Economics Geography, which is going to take place in June 2025. This is the most important academic conference for economic geographers, which began in 1999 in Singapore. And we were notified and given this elephant that you see on the photo that has been passed on from convener to convener, and now it's sitting in my office. So we are the first campus to host this event in North America, and are expecting about 800 to up to 1,000 people, participants, in early June. So please return to campus, and as I would like to welcome you again for this major event. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk today, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Lauermann. I finished my PhD here in 2014 with a dissertation committee including Mark Davidson, Tony Bevington, and Jim Murphy. And during my time here at Clark, I also had the good luck to learn from people like Yuko, James, Deb, and Sam Raddick. And I really would be remiss if I didn't also point out I met my wife at Clark. She also finished her PhD in 2014 in history, and a decade later we have 2 kids, 2 dogs, 2 successful academic careers, and we also have a lot of gratitude for this place, right? This place that gave us both an education and an opportunity to start our family. So today I'm an associate professor at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Pratt is a world-leading arts and design college with especially strong programs in architecture, urban planning, and information science. And I teach in the latter. I teach in a graduate program focused on urban data. I also run an urban GIS research center that provides community mapping services for various nonprofits and community-based organizations in the city. I'm an urban geographer, and I suppose I'm here today to talk about urban geography as it relates to Clark. So my own research is focused on how economic inequality shapes the material landscape of American cities. I'm particularly interested in themes like gentrification, segregation, and how those get materialized in the built environment. So I have 2 empirical projects at the moment. One is an NSF-funded study that's mapping gentrification and racial displacement across 100 American cities, and the other is a book project about luxury housing development and residential segregation in New York. Methodologically, I use a lot of critical GIS and critical quantitative methods, but like most urbanists, I'm a jack of all trades, right? I'm very much value mixed methods, and I think, as with many of my fellow urban geographers, I'm really interested in the kind of scholarship that blends critical theory and data-driven empiricism. It's the kind of epistemological pragmatism that Mei-Po Kwan once called hybrid geographies, or Elvin Wiley called strategic positivism. And in my corner of the discipline, we see it today in all sorts of kind of data activist initiatives like Data for Progress, Data for Black Lives, the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, the People's Atlas of Detroit, or there are the many different data justice labs that have been founded in the last few years. So as I thought about what I was going to say today, as I thought about what I wanted to say about urban geography at Clark, the theme I kept coming back to was that kind of epistemological pragmatism, that kind of methodological pragmatism. And what I mean by that is, for successive generations, urban geographers associated with Clark have been blurring methodological boundaries, right? They've been refusing to be defined by labels like quantitative or qualitative, and have really kind of pursued research that pushes critical urban research wherever the evidence may lead. We see it in a very long history of feminist urban geography work by people like Susan Hansen on mobility, like Mariana Pavlovskaya on mapping feminist economies and cities. We see it with Melissa Gilbert's work on smart cities. We see it with Deb Martin's ability to forge these really cool collaborations that you wouldn't even think would be possible, like collaborating with the HERO program. Elsewhere in the realm of urban political economy, we see that kind of mixing of methods and that kind of data-driven critical theory making in Mark Davidson's work on municipal bankruptcy, Rob Kruger's work on urban sustainability planning, Hamill Pearson's work on green gentrification, Jim Thatcher's work on digital redlining. We see it all over the place, and rather than continue to name a bunch of names, I will just wrap up and say, to my mind, I think what binds all of us together, all of us urbanists who have passed through Worcester at some time in our careers, is a willingness to imagine new practices of critical scholarship. And it's a willingness to choose whatever method you need to answer important questions, and to resist the urge to restrain our questions to the kinds of topics that can be answered with a particular method. Right? It's very much a willingness to build a more persuasive form of critical theory, driven by data, driven by the most innovative tools that we have available to us. And I have to say, I'm thrilled to see that same willingness to imagine at Clark today, especially among the grad students. So I don't know what the future of urban geography will be, or if I will even have a place in it. But I am confident that Clarkies will be at the forefront, kind of pushing what it means to do critically relevant, empirically and theoretically sophisticated work. And I can't wait for the next, however many years I'm around to see it. Thank you.
Okay, this is a trip. Again, last time I was here, I think my dissertation was the last thing this campus had in person, and then everything closed down. It was a Tuesday. Clark closed on Wednesday. So I feel like nothing's changed, but everything's changed also. So I have 3 points to make in 6 minutes, so I'll be as quick as I can. I will start off by just kind of positioning myself, what I do, the things I learned here, what I hope to do, right? So you could say I was trained in political ecology, right? I would consider myself as such. I think that my work is often sort of at the periphery of it sometimes, but regardless, my training is in that field, right? You can also say that I have somewhat of a pedigree, right? So Michael Watts, James McCarthy, Dylan Harris, Dianne's over here too, right? And through all of that work, critique is manifest, right? It's like the point of that work. And I found during my time here, engaging with Bruce Broad and other folks, how to start pivoting away from just being critical towards doing something. And I think that has something to be said about the fact that, I would say two things, right? It's not that political ecology isn't doing something, right? But how to do applied political ecology work is really difficult. It's really hard to teach that too. And so I'm of an age where I, see the world burning and I have to do something about it. I feel compelled to take all the strengths of political ecology, which often focuses on things in the past. It's often very retrospective, right? It's often focused on past intervention. It's often focused on things, lessons we can draw for the future, right? But I really want to take all of those strengths that I was trained in and apply them to things that are currently happening, like the just transition, right? How to put myself in the process, right? To intervene in a process, to intercept money from organizations and make sure it's going to the right people, right? I'm also interested in the future, right? I'm interested in speculative political ecologies in the sense that how can we take all those strengths from political ecology and prevent awful things from happening, right? Climate change, keep it from getting worse. So I've done a lot of work in my time here since then, collaborating with folks like Alex Moulton in the back in my cohort, Dan Santos, who graduated the year after me. We just released a special issue last week on the sort of experimental and speculative political ecologies, right? So we're really thinking through how, again, to apply all of the things I've learned from James, from Dianne, and again, sort of move it towards the future, right? And I'll say I'm not the first to do that, right? I'm in a context where you have J.K. Gibbs and Graham, we're doing prefigurative politics over there, So I'm very grateful to be in this place to learn these things. I want to suggest too, and sort of be grateful to the fact that I came up, I suppose, as an academic during a time where DEI was happening. That's something I had to take very seriously in my work. I was in this room watching Priscilla McCutcheon give a talk. I think it was the second keynote that I went to. And it was the first time I heard the word positionality and reflexivity, right? And I've thought about those things very deeply since then, right? I'm so grateful to be coming of an age as an academic where we have to take those things seriously, and it totally informs my work and who I am as a person, I think that my initial project when I moved here was to go to Nepal and do all this work that I think could have been really good, but it wasn't what I wanted to do as the person I wanted to be, right? And I'm really grateful where I wound up, and it's because of the conversations I was having, again, with folks here, with Alex and others, to really push that, not agenda, but transformative work forward, and I'm really grateful to have been a part of that here. I will say too, and this is my last point, for better or worse, my Clark training has sort of translated into every other element of my work. So as a professor, I've been told to stop asking questions at Faculty Senate. I've been told by the Chancellor to stop talking because I have a very critical mind, right? And it was sharpened here. And I'm very interested to carry that work into everywhere I go, right? So I'm always asking questions. Why is funding like this? Why do we treat students this way? I recently started a project on the political ecologies of student debt. And all of that stemming from my experience here, again, the kind of person I want to be, the kind of work I want to do, right? Which again, I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity here to sharpen those skills and again, bring those elsewhere, right? Not just in my teaching and my research, but again, in the relationships I build and not build with people like my chancellor. And so all of that to say, and I'll wrap up, again, extreme gratitude. I'm so thankful to be here. I'm so thankful for all the folks I learned from. I'm still learning a lot. I just had a really beautiful moment with Karen Fry, who's in the other one right now, but everything I learned about being a good teacher, I learned from Karen, right? Karen's an amazing teacher, incredible. I learned to be a better person from folks like James and Jody and Dianne. I'm thankful to folks like Kristen Shake and Prajwal, who are here somewhere, who made my research possible. I wouldn't have been able to do that without them letting me stay in their houses, right? And so again, this community is really special, and beyond all of my academic work, right? I do think I'm just a better person because of this place, and I'm extremely grateful for that. So yeah, I'll wrap up with that. I'm happy to talk more about experimental political ecology or whatever, but I wanted just to take this as an opportunity to close the book because I didn't get that chance. So thank you guys.
Does this microphone work here, just on the stand? Or?
I think we'll find out if someone comes in.
Well, it's been on the whole time.
Okay, I think that's a good sign.
Okay, but you can hear me okay through this one? So I don't have to move around. Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about Clark and my experience here in the 1990s, basically. And it, in some sense, follows a lot of the points John made, but maybe from the perspective of having lived through that moment, a particular moment anyway. So I came to Clark after doing a master's degree in what we then called the New Industrial Geography with Julie Graham at the University of Massachusetts. Julie was, of course, a graduate of Clark's PhD program, and to say that she guided me here would be a complete understatement. She basically told me that's what I have to do. I was interested in economic change and how economy could be differentiated over space. As an economic geographer, even a Marxist one of a sort, right, Clark was the obvious choice. I'd learned to talk in terms of industries and regions and scales. I'd know what capitalism was doing and how it profoundly and unevenly transformed everything. It was a good fit for me at the time. But along the way, somehow, when I came to Clark, I found myself increasingly interested in the environment. I wanted to think about nature society systems and how they might vary and even contain possibilities other than just the extraction for industrial wealth accumulation. And I wanted to do this in New England, of all places, in coastal fishing communities that I knew very well as my home place. But in those days, if you were interested in the variety of ways people might engage with the environment in terms of livelihoods, if you were interested in the role, for example, of community-based moral economies and local ecological knowledges, your research would inevitably take you somewhere very far away from a developed industrial world or coastal New England. But when you got there, you get to document a whole host of complex relations between economy and environment, all tangled up with other knowledges, forms of property, rationalities, reciprocities. It was so super interesting to me. But, you know, my work was in economic geography in the Northeast. So how did I know about this other way of doing things? I had Paul Robbins and Brad Yokish tell me all about it. Their work pointed to the varied relationships that could exist between economies and environments. Relationships that were largely invisible to the new industrial geography. Paul and Brad were, of course, teaching me this thing I didn't know anything about called political ecology, and for that I am deeply grateful, even as it presented to me the conundrum of how to possibly apply it in industrial-scale fisheries in the Northeast of the United States. Could economic difference exist there? Other ways of thinking about the environment? To think about difference, about its politics and possibility, about its capacities to disrupt here and now, is of course to be indebted to feminist thought. How did I learn this? Well, I had Melissa Gilbert and Mariana Pavlovskaya to teach me. Melissa's research on women's mobilities relative to work revealed other relationships to economy. She showed us that there were other actors that diverged from Homo economicus and that they were all around us. Mariana taught us about multiple economies in both pre- and post-Soviet Union, discernible at the level of the gendered body, the household, the urban, and the nation. Finally, these different approaches that came together for me here at Clark University can't somehow, in my mind, be separated from mapping. And here I have to thank Margaret Pierce, whose work revealed that maps were not only imbued with power, but with traces of other, primarily indigenous knowledges, identities, and epistemologies. A new kind of cartographic sensibility was emerging, and it gave to us maps as sites to reappropriate, maps to engage other worlds, other possibilities, and other futures. It was this amazingly rich confluence and cross-fertilization of economic and feminist geography, political ecology, and critical cartographies that allowed us to ask research questions that, at least from my perspective in the 1990s, seemed previously unimaginable. In my case, I was free to ask, why can't we enact other fishing economies and environments beyond capitalism right here and right now? Like that question just seemed, I could start asking it. But there was a whole lot going on, all these other dissertations all around me. And I think it allowed us to develop those dissertations in ways that could be described, for example, and this all sounds really commonplace now, but to talk in terms of a post-structural Marxian economic geography where you might map the commons, that was like a mashup of different things that was impossible, I would argue, before Clark in the 1990s. You could talk in terms of a feminist political ecology using ethnographic and remote sensing methods. You could be an urban feminist geographer looking at households using GIS. I mean, there was a whole range of things that, again, seem rather commonplace to us now, but I think at that time were quite novel formations and really quite revolutionary. And I think that most of us who did our dissertations here at that time could draw some example from their dissertation that could exemplify this sort of productive cross-fertilization. This sort of, I have to do this sort of thinking around, as Julie Graham, the self-described theory slut, might call it. And if I have 2 more minutes, I would like to just show one map and just describe it as an example of this. How do I do that?
Just keep advancing the slides, it should be.
Okay. Please presume that I know how to do that. Where do I aim? Ah, there it is. Okay. That's it. That's the map. This is my map. This is for my dissertation. This is a map produced by industrial fishers in New England at the time in the 1990s. It's a map where what happens is if you drag a net on the bottom of the ocean trying to catch codfish on the back of your boat, you can't see the bottom of the ocean. Your goal is to get really close to rocks because that's where the fish hang out. But if your net goes over the rocks, you destroy your net and you're done. So you need to know intimately this landscape on the bottom of the ocean without ever seeing it. How do you know it? Well, trial and error. You drop your net, you pull it along, and if you're successful, it draws a continuous line on a piece of plotter paper that's in a machine on your boat. And if you trace that same line again, and you leave the paper in there instead of changing it, you get another line in the same place, and on and on and on. If you take a turn to the left and you ruin your net, well, you're not going to do that again. And over months and months, you end up with a map like this that shows you the best routes to get around all the rocks with your fishing vessel. And then you say, well, actually, that's only really not that good because it's only one place where you can go successfully fishing. I need about 20 places as a fisherman to successfully fish. So what do? I trade that piece of paper with another fisherman who has also done the same thing on his boat. And over time, I collect local knowledge of the bottom of the ocean. And what else happens in this industrialized fishing industry where everybody's thought to be competing individuals, you end up building a community of people who share knowledge and a de facto commons upon which they operate. That insight would have been impossible for me as an economic geographer without my political ecology friends telling me about how commons were managed in far-flung parts of the earth. It would have been impossible without a different mapping sensibility and the power of those maps. It would have been impossible without a feminist epistemological approach that said, no, you need to look for difference, not for sameness. And that's my story. You want to try this one?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I usually like to stand up, but we'll see how this works. Keep shrinking every year. Okay. So when I look out at this room, I can still see the shadows of undergraduate students filling those seats in my gender and environment class. And I would say that one of the hallmarks of my time here at Clark was what I was able to gain and to share with, to contribute to undergraduate as well as graduate students, as well as colleagues, right? And across fields, across disciplines, across subfields, and across generations. And what I want to talk about today is the fact that it wasn't always easy, but what really happened here, I think some of the most valuable work that happened here, not just in feminist political ecology, but in many fields here, is exactly what Kevin's just been describing, what John Lauermann is talking about. We often talk about centers and peripheries. We talk about hierarchies, who's the founder, who's the central person, who's the go-to, and what are the centers and the edges of the big topics of the day in a particular field, right? So we have these circles with centers in them and hard edges. We have fractal silos, first the disciplines, then the subdisciplines. Sometimes they're worse, you know, I don't know, sometimes the word is worse than the stakes are lower, but at the same time, we actually got past that every day, day to day, in everyday life in this institution, not without struggle, but we did. And what what I saw in that and what I was seeing in the field, out in the world, was instead of thinking about silos, about center periphery, about hierarchies, and about just critique. By the way, Dylan, it's that they don't like to publish my stuff that's positive, but it exists. It's a life full of practice that I force people to listen to and force people, but you guys won't see it. Anyway, so this thing that we're really doing was networked, and it was a rooted network, and it still is. That is, in your nodes, you don't have to be at the center to be a node. You can be a node, be at the periphery of this field and the periphery of that field. I speak from experience, I scars. However, the fences, you know, they're barbed wire. But you can do it, and it's because that is actually how we are connected. So in a relational epistemology, that is my experience in the end as I look back on it at Clark University and in this discipline and in these fields of human environment and feminism and a whole raft of other things, but mainly ecology and feminist thought and action and activism, we are functioning in those networks. And what I began to see when I first got here, I had a perfect example. I went to the meeting at Amherst on rethinking Marxism. And I almost didn't do it because I was a new person. I was supposed to be getting my classes together, and it was the fall, and I was teaching out of a book that I just received, and I was going to teach from it because it was so good. It was Carolyn Merchant's book, which now I've gotten past, never mind. But meanwhile, I went to see it. I went to that conference, and I was privileged to experience a conversation between Richard Levins, an icon of leftist action on agroecology and on international relations, all kinds of things, and from Harvard, but he would say I'm from Harvard, I'm not of it. He introduced himself at the meeting from the New York Marxist School. And so I just thought he was a truck driver from a union, and he was a really damn bright guy. Oh my God, that's Richard Levins from Harvard, okay, great. So he stood up and he starts to question very positively, productively, not like some Marxists. He starts to question very productively and interactively Sandra Harding. Is it Sandra or Susan? Somebody tell me. Sandra, okay. Sandra Harding, the iconic feminist historian of science, okay? And she is describing situated knowledge, right? She is describing, well, for me, I would call it seeing multiple. And Levin stands up and he says to her, he asks her a couple of fixed questions. He says, so what you're really talking about here is an epistemology of allies. Yes, she says. And I just grabbed onto that. And I've been running with it like a little football ever since. And whenever the going got tough, I just hugged that thing and moved forward or went around, did an end run, went off to the side. But it was what kept me able to work at the interface between critical social science, not just social science, and science, conservation. That's harder than ecology theorists, I can tell you from experience, because they think they're the good guys, so they've got a whole other thing going on. They think they've got the moral high ground. So what I was able to do, based on work here with people doing work on Earth Transformed, people doing work on risk, people doing work in feminist geographies in the United States, people doing work on difference between humans and other beings, right? What I was able to do was to look at transformed environments and then to think my way into emergent ecologies. And by emergent ecologies, I mean it's something that comes out of its own accord from a complex system. It's a new thing that self-creates from a set of diverse actors and processes. Right? And to be able to think about the value of actually existing ecologies, not just imagined pristine ecologies, and not just resource-oriented, extractivist, and instrumentalist ecologies, or only human-centered ecologies. But to want to walk into, actually existing places and be able to see what people already have, what they're already doing. And I couldn't have done this without every graduate student I ever worked with and every classroom I ever stood up in front of, because people ended up bringing things to me, new literature, new ideas, hard questions, their own thoughts, their own experience. And what eventually happened for me in feminist political ecology, people thought that I'd stopped doing it because I wasn't talking about gender all the time anymore. But what I was doing was talking at the interface between science and critical social theory and activism from a feminist perspective, from a feminist lens. And that is using that epistemology of allies and the concept of Donna Haraway, honest witness at millennium. And I'm trying to be an honest witness at millennium and counting, and looking at resurgence and reexistence of worlds where many worlds are still possible. And looking at what already exists, and at the same time what is struggling to be born or what is coming through as a new way to be. People doing prefigurative work in living arrangements, people doing prefigurative work in how they do agriculture, setting up new trade networks in Chiapas, okay? Everything from the little group that we get our food from in Chiapas every Wednesday from a farm up on the mountain, to the stores that are getting products from Zapatista and other politically framed rural communities, to the collectives of young people living in the city, doing human rights work, doing support work for communities that are under siege, people basically acting as witnesses in many conditions where people are under direct physical threat. You can see the prefiguration, and it's also painful. We got a narco next door, and now he's got the house on the other side of us too. We share walls. If they ever come to shoot him, we're in trouble. You know, it's fractal, right? It's actually not one of the places where that whole thing is the worst or the most dangerous right now, but it is now pervasive. What Kendra was talking about last night, it is now. It's part and parcel of the national political apparatus, from the military and the police into people in government, into people in the legal system, in the judiciary, in the prisons, and at the same time, there is, and what gives me hope there and why I need to live there and not here, is because people are working from this epistemology of allies every day on the ground, and many of them are feminists, and the group that I'm most closely connected now is a small group of feminists that are committed to taking care of each other and then also being there for various organizations and work. And I thank Clark for helping me to get to that place while being in an academic institution, because it doesn't happen everywhere.
So thanks so much to all of the panelists. I confess I pick up this microphone with some trepidation, but we'll see what happens. So thanks so much again to all of the panelists for such a wide-ranging and incredibly rich set of observations and recollections. We do have about half an hour, and that can be for question and answer, but it can also be for discussion. I'm very aware that most, all of the people in this room are also participants in the fields and traditions that we've talked about here. And so if people have particular questions they want to ask to a single panelist, to groups of panelists, to the entire panel, we can absolutely do that. But also if people want to share some of their own experiences or reflections about what has made Clark such an incredibly generative place for scholarship and education in these particular fields, that's absolutely, part of the mandate of this session as well. So think about that for a minute, and the floor is open. I think that since we're trying to record these sessions, I will ask people to wait and get the microphone before they say something so that hopefully at least most of it will be caught. So, does anyone want to be brave and go first? And I'll also just ask people if you would introduce yourself when you get the microphone. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Stephen Battis. I'm class of 76. So geography was in a different state then. The experience I wanted to share was I went on and got a master's at the University of Pennsylvania in planning. And I was doing work that was multidisciplinary. And I was fortunate enough to have a thesis advisor that would just kind of adopt me, who was a lawyer. But the work I was doing was predictive modeling in the conversion of farmland to suburban tract housing. So this kind of went across 5 different schools. So I got people to agree to meet with me, but not to sponsor me. So my question is really, how do you foster this multidisciplinary study that the last speaker just referenced? Because I found it very challenging when I was a student.
Does anyone want to respond?
We do want this microphone, yes?
I think so, yes.
That's the bad thing. Okay, get rid of that. I will just say, and I forgot to mention this, and this is relevant to your question, but for myself, specifically here, it was never an issue. You know, I feel like there was always opportunities to converse across disciplines, and I showed up with this weird theoretical basket of anarchist geography, queer theory, all these things I wanted to do and figure out, and no one here told me to calm down. They're like, okay, great, figure it out. And it's been really positive, and I think that's been my experience since leaving here as well. I try to encourage that in my students. I don't think it's something that is tangibly recreatable easily, if that makes sense, but it just happened to be here when I got here, and I'm very grateful for that. So I don't know. I mean, for myself here, it's never been an issue, I will say. And I take this brave sort of theoretical nomadic approach that I was afforded here, and I give that to my students where I currently work. And it sort of drives them nuts, but because they just want to be told what to do sometimes. And I'm like, figure it out, read something, tell me about it, you know? But that's how I learn, and it's been really productive here for me, so.
Other questions, comments?
I had a follow-up. I don't want to monopolize, but so is the process kind of ad hoc based on the individual professor and then being able to connect the students to the appropriate people in other departments, or is there a structured process that kind of supports that?
I think there is. I mean, I think I'm speaking from the position of having been in a department, Rutgers University, geography for over 20 years now, and now chair, and thinking a lot about, how to attract students, what is geography, and of course, drawing on just really long traditions of nature society and essentially a kind of interdisciplinarity that is hard to convey, actually, to our undergrads, to be honest. And to convey the excitement and freedom it might give you is the hardest thing, because they're often not looking for that. And then it's also the university needs to develop new degrees that are interdisciplinary and involve nature and society. We're like, whoa, wait, there's this thing called geography. So there's these battles to get it known. So that's there. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's not always as easy as I think. And also, having said that, I think some of the things we're talking about here, or maybe we've reflected on as graduate students in a PhD program, and Clark in particular, isn't just an interdisciplinarity that are along traditional disciplinary lines, but a sort of epistemological freedom, and that's something else that I think is special about the Clark experience. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I know what you're talking about in terms of sort of translating the ethos into practice. And I think there is some significant challenges there. Two things. One is that I do believe that we at GSG, we have a culture. And I remember once Jody Emil saying, and CUBS used to organize this little booklet. Every year, CUBS would organize a booklet and then just sort of do a little self-introduction of every member in a printed form. And then faculty are asked to say something about you and what's the favorite thing to do in Worcester, or what are you good at, and so on. And I remember, and I always struggle, like, oh my God, what's this? My favorite thing to do in Worcester was to get out of Worcester, for example. With that aside, I remember reading Jody Emil's entry, former colleague and faculty member here, and she said, I'm good at offbeat synthetic thinking. And I thought, that's what it is at Clark. We all engage in this freedom of offbeat synthetic thinking, which is really the core and the source of our creativity as well as productivity. So I think it's in the ethos and then the work ahead, and it really works well with liberal arts education at the undergraduate level. And the work ahead is to how to translate that passion that is created from that offbeat synthetic thinking to action. And I think what you're talking about is that action piece, which has its own challenges.
So I'm Lydia Savage. I did my Ph.D. here and finished in '96. I did my undergrad at Berkeley, and now I'm at a public university in Maine, chronically underfunded like many public universities. But I do think one of the amazing things about Clark is I left a very large university with a very well-established geography program that was always under threat. And I think when you get to Clark as a graduate student, this is the program, right? You're never defending geography on campus or explaining why you're a geographer or what geography is. And so I think it allows you just a different level of freedom to now say, what do I want geography to be, right? What do I want my geography to be? And I think, as Dianne talked about, working at those nodes, right? I mean, I had many conversations with Kevin and Melissa and Mariana, and they just all sort of blur together and become your own research and your own epistemology. And I think it cannot be understated that, like Kevin, I'm also a chair and constantly going, we're over here, we already do that. We don't need food studies, environmental studies, like we do that. And I just never felt like, and maybe I was a graduate student and faculty were doing this that I didn't know, but I felt like we never got questioned, at least as a student, as to, what's geography again? What are you gonna do to that degree? All of those questions that I continually got at Cal.
It's a long way. Hi. So I'm Myrna Breitbart. I did my undergraduate degree here and master's and PhD eventually. And I have to say that I had no idea what geography was until I came and sat in Martin Bowman's class. And it was like a Chinese menu. Every day a different professor would come in from a different orientation in the field and present and so forth. And it was incredible and engaging and amazing. And I think at the time we were here, my colleagues and I here, late 60s, 70s was as political a time as it is now, in a different way. And we didn't have the opportunity, as many colleges have since done, to create ways of being interdisciplinary. And especially if your focus is on problem solving and on an understanding and engaging with the world, and social change is kind of becomes your mission. And a couple of things about that. One was, as an undergraduate, it was amazing to interact every day with graduate students and with faculty on a really intimate level. And I don't know where that exists anywhere else but here. But it made such a difference, intellectually, socially, in terms of that engagement. And I ended up teaching for 40 years at Hampshire College, and that was probably the only place I could have gone to because it was very similar to Clark Geography and its orientation, and in fact now has totally reinvented its curriculum around key problems. And there aren't even any interdisciplinary schools anymore. It's a mashup because there's a recognition that to really be able to address problems, you really don't need to, you can't have those strict boundaries and so forth. But the question I wanted to put to the group in front here is, I found it necessary when I was teaching to have one foot in the community or communities and one foot in the university or college. And that was a hard thing to navigate. I wanted my students to be learning outside the classroom, not just inside the classroom, and I wanted them to bring problems back to the classroom and to collectively kind of engage with those problems and work on them. And we started a fairly robust community engagement program. And I do notice there's a building here across the street called the Community Engagement Building or something. But I'm just wondering, particularly I've heard a lot about Pratt. Pratt seems to be a place that's intimately involved in the community. And I've had graduate students I've known of who've gone off to Pratt and been actively involved in working and using their academic work and their research to work intimately with communities. And I'm just wondering if maybe some of you could speak to that a little bit, how you've navigated that and crossed that boundary, and what value that's had for your students and also for your own work.
Yeah, I can maybe take a first stab at that. You are correct. Pratt is all about community engagement, and the center I run was originally born out of an entity called the Pratt Center for Community Development, which has been around for like 100 years and has been doing community engagement work in Brooklyn for a very long time. Most of the work I do in my center is kind of community mapping for organizations that can't afford real data scientists. So our typical entry point is to offer this kind of technical expertise that they wouldn't otherwise, community groups wouldn't otherwise have available. And that is always a good way to make friends. But what I've discovered when I'm sort of running student teams, right, as students are kind of working on these community projects, the map is often the entry point, right? It's the teaching tool, it's the artifact that excites students, and especially for students who may not have a geography background, right? The idea that you can visualize the world and visualize social problems in this single piece of paper or on a computer screen, that is a really powerful organizing tool, and it's one I think we maybe underestimate the power of the map because we work with them all the time, right? But it is really a powerful tool for that kind of engagement.
I'll just go really quick.
Did you want to go?
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Okay, well, about keeping a foot in the community, one of the things that I found difficult when I first got here, the community I was in touch with, which I had come to know when I was living in Nairobi for 7 years, and I was working at an agroforestry research center, international, and I had to be attached to some community somewhere, so I started to go out to this place where they had a methodology development program for some, that was their stock and trade for a while. And I found when I started working with people, that I was learning way more there than I was at the agroforestry institution where I was working about agroforestry, about the conditions of production, of reproduction, the relations of production and reproduction, the relations between communities and the state, the ongoing devastation of a continuing rolling colonialism that you could see on the land, you could see in people's bodies, you could see it in their eyes. You could also see this incredibly strong, just immersion in the living world and the determination to carry on, to re-exist or continue existing as they were, to deal with emergent ecologies, whatever it was. And they did something that taught me about theory. So I watched them and I asked them about how they used to be before the colony, and they talked about how they moved in 3 scales of space and time across a whole region. And I went, how do I talk about that? There's no models for that. It's circulation. It's not in a box. Land tenure, what does that mean for this thing? And so I began to think about rooted networks. That's where that came from. I didn't get it from some book. It came from what people told me, and I had to come up with something to explain it. So I think sometimes we think we're just giving back to communities, but I think by being really immersed and opening ourselves to everyday experience, we can really generate new theory. But the other piece was then when I got here, what am I going to do? I'm not in Kenya. And so I started to work in my neighborhood. I lived 3 blocks away. I began with Doug Johnson taking me on a tour of the neighborhood, showing me the housing, talking about the history, and I began taking my students out for tours. Then I added the environmental justice issues in Worcester, and pretty soon we had an urban ecology class. And we were going out into the field, which was our neighborhood and the rest of Worcester, every week, a 3-hour lab. And then we had this little secret, which the department just let exist. We did a 4-day trip to New York City. Everybody couch surfed. We took our own cars, and we went to visit environmental justice organizations all over the city to look at what people were doing about some of the problems we were thinking about and reading about. And so I think that by doing those things, which was hard, and it's not easy for administration to handle those things, but by doing, and there's some people here working very hard to do that right now, it's so important for students to go somewhere else and immerse and be open and see what difference means in another context and come back with new eyes. I could see gendered landscapes in Worcester because I've been in Kenya, by following women through the land. So I think that kind of teaching is a really important tool for that objective. And thanks, Maureen.
Susan Hansen, I taught here for 25 years or so. I just have one observation, a simple observation. That I think it's very interesting that all 3 of you who were graduate students spoke very intensively about the importance of your interactions with other graduate students and how that shaped you probably more than your interactions with faculty. And I remember saying to incoming grad students, they always talk to the director, whoever that is, first. And I was a director for a while. And I always said, this may surprise you, but I think you're going to learn more from your fellow grad students than you are from the faculty. And I think, just listening here today, I think I was right.
I could just actually respond to that and speak to the last question on community engaged work. So just last night, I was talking with Rich and Jacob, who I lived with, who are here, who I learned so much from, who I still talk to and learn from every day. And Rich and I were talking about how we came to this work because we're political people, right? And we wanted to do political work, but we didn't know really how to do that. And so doing a PhD was, again, a place where my weird handbasket of just theoretical ideas and what I wanted to do worked. You know, I was also young and I had a contract, great, I had a job. So I came here to do my work, but during my time here, what I thought was community work changed quite a bit. And I think this goes back to my point with regards to the sort of transformative work of DEI and diversity work, and really thinking seriously about things like the politics of health and what it means to work with people. And I really had to sort of sit with that myself when I started my work here, which was going to be international, and I really had to sit with, again, who I am, what kind of work I want to do, how I can be useful in a context with people I'm accountable to, because we live in an era of profound accountability too right now. And so I've had to really think a lot about this question of community engagement, especially where I live in Colorado, and the organizations I work with aren't always research, right? I just care about people. And this work allows me to do that, right? 20% of my job is service, and my department allows that to count. So all of that to say, right, I really take seriously Ruth Wilson Gilmore's sort of charge with scholar activism and how we're activists in scholar spaces, we're scholars in activist spaces, but we're always awkwardly both of those things if this is our job. And I think about that a lot. And so to that end, when I do my work with communities in Colorado, I have to really understand that I'm not doing objective work, right? I care about people, and I'm injecting myself into a process of a just transition, for example. I'm using my credentials to intercept funds to communities that would otherwise not get it. But I had to think really deeply about my attachments to these places because I'm not from there, you know? I'm from Mississippi. I did research in Appalachia because I thought it was close to home. It's not, you know? And these are awkward things we have to constantly negotiate. And I think historically, maybe even 10 years ago, community-based work meant something very different than it does now. And I think it's a good thing that we're accountable to folks, you know? And I learned so much from conversations with my friends constantly, to your point.
I think we might have time for possibly one more question or comment, depending.
My name is Noel Eisenstadt. I graduated here in 1992 with a government and geography degree. So the professors Hanson and Kravitz, I know I still owe you that favor, but I'm still appreciative. If you think I'm kidding, some of you. The one thing that I'm struck in this conversation is that there's two worlds. And I think you've all done great. You've explained the ability to apply and practice and have empathy and still be empirical, all these great things. But I grew up at a different time. There was no data. There really wasn't. And fundamentally, your data drove, what data was available, drove what you could or couldn't do. Now, I can work in the world of food deserts, where federally qualified health centers should go. What does it mean to have a mortgage foreclosure prevention program in a city or an anti-eviction mediation program? All of those things are because of mapping and data. And all I can say is, I didn't know how old I was until today. I now get it. But I really have to say that the analysis here really has to touch the ability to map. I mean, and all the data needs to be mapped. I mean, the only thing I would say, as geographers, for those who work in GIS programs and all the information programs we can talk about, you should also teach these folks a little more map theory. Because honestly, they don't look like the maps I had to produce. Thank you.
So we have a few more minutes. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative, and I am a faculty member here, and add just one or two comments myself, and then give the mic to someone else. So I will say, I said something at lunch about why I wanted to join the Graduate School of Geography at Clark, and that holds true, and a lot of what's been said on the panel exemplifies that. It was the fact that I saw people like Kevin coming out as my peers. It was the fact that there were faculty here like Dianne who were inspirations in my field. And I value that tremendously. And there is something about the particular, call it what you will, but there's something about the particular sort of more than interdisciplinarity, intellectual openness, and methodological eclecticism and political commitments fused together that we've heard some examples of that really do distinguish Clark Geography in my experience from many, many other geography departments, and that I think in many ways shows that the department, in how it trains students, lives up to geography's promise as a truly, truly integrative and incredibly wide-ranging anti-disciplinary discipline. in a way that the promise is often talked about but rarely fulfilled. And I feel like it is fulfilled here and continues to be. So I appreciate that. The second thing I want to say about that is that path dependency is incredibly important. One of the things that's an incredible privilege being a faculty member here is that every year we get amazing applications from prospective PhD students from all around the world who have gotten the sense somehow that Clark is the place that they want to be. And that's something that we can't ever take for granted. And so you can't rest on your laurels. That path dependency has to be constantly justified and continued. And with the importance of those kinds of path dependencies and legacies, I think it's appropriate. I want to give the last word to Dianne.
Thanks. I actually asked for it because I didn't get to my conclusion, and it's really important. It's the most important thing I have to say. As epitomizing the kinds of things that people get up to across generations, and this is interesting because there's a lot of cross-generational stuff happening too. Dianne Ojeda, Nirma, both PhD graduates, Jerry Emmel, and myself just completed an article, and it was published in the Annual Review of Environment and Resources. Okay, so it is possible to talk across, but it took me 20 years for Anna Lockwell to call and say, would you do an article on feminist ecology? And then we all got our courage up. We decided we were going to write what we really thought. And we got another journal that was ready to take it if these guys said no. But they took the whole thing and didn't change anything. So it is called Feminist Ecologies. It's the Annual Review of
There we go.
Environment and Resources.
I think from my perspective, it's a question. So I do a lot of computational work. It's not all right.
Given that we are at time, I'm not even going to try. I will just say that if you would like to sit and listen to Jim Thatcher for a few minutes, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, we have a break, and then obviously a second set of panels later this afternoon. And please join me in thanking the panelists.